welcome our friends from the University of the West Indies. We always make space for them. And of course, our next guest, no stranger to the Morning Brew. She's been here with us before and she joins us again this morning. We thank her for her time and her perspective. We welcome Dr. Gabrielle Hosein, our senior lecturer there. I know it's the gender department there at UE, it's gender studies. So, Dr. Hosein, I want to say thank you so much for being here with us as we touch on women in leadership. Very interesting conversation this morning. Welcome.
Morning to your viewers, Jason.
Of course, you know, this is quite a watershed moment. I think first time in the Commonwealth, we find ourselves in a position where all three main executive offices, I mean, we're talking here president, prime minister, opposition leader, all women. And in that particular, at least with that reality, with this meaningful change, how does this translate to women across the board in the public and private sector?
That's the key question. I think in my comments, I have affirmed that this is historic, and we do need to treat historic moments as what they are. So when a glass ceiling is cracked, I wouldn't say shattered, but when a glass ceiling is cracked, then those are moments that haven't happened in history before. And I think it is extremely powerful to have both Penelope Beckles and Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, the new Prime Minister, as the leaders in the House. And we have yet to see what difference that makes. With regard to posts such as the President, those carry a very different kind of political capital, are not quite the same. And as we say in the field, those are hugely symbolic developments. At the same time, we look to see what the substantive or transformative effects of that are, which is where our attention should really be. Will we see a change? You know, I think that we do need to give the new administration a little bit of time. Trinidadians are very quick to criticize. And of course, our hope for a different kind of governance hangs in the wire. We wait with bated breath, and that hope feels very fragile. But it is a debate, Jason, whether or not having women in power leads to a different kind of governance. In some countries in political history, we have in fact seen that happen. We have seen women actually pay more attention to gendered issues. We have seen women engage in gender responsive budgeting. We've seen a different kind of leadership. At the same time, there is also a history. You look at Margaret Thatcher, who was extremely right-wing and set in train right-wing neoliberal rollout that was extremely anti-worker, Indira Gandhi, and some others. So I think we want to say that time will tell.
You know, Dr. Hosein, there is the perception that women are a bit soft in leadership. There are many who they become a bit apprehensive, a bit nervous when a woman is at the wheel. How does a woman now balance this? Because clearly some come in, I'm glad you mentioned Margaret Thatcher. She was so stiff that they called her the Iron Lady. Very strong policies against labor, to the point where her legacy was very much divided there in England, and I guess history tells the story. But when we look at the local context, how does a woman, when it comes to governance of Trinidad and Tobago, we all live here, we know this space, bring forward a firm hand, but at the same time, bring empathy that I guess would be expected from a woman in a leadership role?
You know, Jason, I don't think of women in the Caribbean as soft. I think of women in the Caribbean as descending from enslaved and indentured labor, women who protested, women who were incredibly resilient, women who worked. From the time women came to the Caribbean, the majority of our ancestors, they came as workers, not as wives, and they were performing care duties, domestic duties, as well as working, whether in cane fields or in subsistence gardening or any other of the independent livelihoods that women had. So that is a stereotype in the plantation economy that was typically associated with white womanhood and in fact was never ever applied to Indian and African women. So when we think of our our history as women and our foremothers, I think we have to start from a different place, that women in the Caribbean have always exercised leadership, that they have always been resilient, and that they have always had to fight for anything that they have ever achieved for themselves or for their children. And sometimes have done it with the support of the men and women in their family, and sometimes have had to fight alone. And I think that that's a much more Caribbean starting point for us. At the same time, I think it's really important that we do see that women have the potential to bring in a different style of leadership, one that emphasizes qualities of care and that treats the population as if our relationships with each other are defined by care rather than domination and violence. Now, this is not something that we want to see only women champion, nor can women be the only ones that champion it. I think that the idea is that all of governance and all of social relations are defined by the devalued characteristic of care rather than the characteristics associated with domination and violence. But speaking specifically about Ms. Penelope Beckles, now political leader in the House and of the PNM in the House, and Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, what we have is the return in the discourse and public rhetoric, particularly of the new Prime Minister, of care and love. I think the population was feeling battered by Dr. Rowley's violent style of engagement. And I think that has fallen on hearts that needed healing and needed to feel included. But the rubber hits the road, as they say, in policies, legislation, and in the programs that will be rolled out. So the discourse is an important one. Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, in the speech that she gave in the swearing-in ceremony, which I thought was extremely sophisticated, emphasized care, but also said, don't mistake my kindness for weakness. I mean, I thought it was an excellent speech.
I found that to be rather profound because obviously we recall the 2010 and 2015 where many, again, the perception was that some of the characters in the cabinet at the time were trying to run hoops around her. You know, obviously, her being a woman, I would imagine some of the strong men there probably feel they could, well, believing they could strong arm, and she had to obviously send many packing, send many home. I remember there were lots of people who were relieved of their particular role and function. So we find ourselves in this new dispensation with also some more strong men in the fold, and I guess that was probably just a little warning to all who feel that I guess they could probably step in correct. That's the perception I got. What you got?
That's the perception I got as well. I think she is. I think she's warning everybody inside the party and outside the party, and that is the right thing to do. To say, don't cause problems that I need to hold you accountable for, because I'm not going to let you risk the country this time. And we can only hope that is in fact, I mean, she said all the words that she needs to say, and we can only hope that that's exactly what we see. So I want to say, JW, just that I don't think that these are soft women. I think that these are both women who've had to fight, women who have had to stay strong, women who've had to hold the course, women who have had to take humiliation and defeat and find an inner strength in which to remain focused on the goals that they had, both these women. And but I do think these are women who both have talked about and who we have seen bring a different style of leadership. And that style of leadership, we hope, is transformative, and we hope that we see a more caring approach to leadership, not just from the women, but also from the men that they lead.
Let me ask you, and I want to be frank this morning, and I want to put this to you before we get into the actual composition of the cabinet with certain women in particular roles. But these women clearly had to fight off competition, and I would imagine the corporate and political gymnastics of both men and women. We know it's a competitive space. Loyalty is the currency. And to rise to the top, especially in the case of the Prime Minister who's on screen, one of the greatest political comebacks And we've always heard that with women, one of the greatest fights they actually get is from other women. I've heard that from women, you know. This is not my statement. I've heard women say that sometimes the greatest enemy are indeed women also in the space, all looking for the top spot and position. What's your perspective on that?
Sure. So first I want to direct your readers to a column I wrote. It's very easy to find. It's called Women Not Their Own Worst Enemy, where I have dealt with this question repeatedly, that women are not their worst enemy. And that's a very complex issue. But women are also not perfect. They are competitive. Some are toxic. Some are not good leaders. We cannot assume that women are going to be better human beings than men. People are people. Human beings are human beings. Some bring a politics to their work that helps them to be better, and some are in it for position, and some are in it with trauma, and some are in it with poor gender socialization. So I think the first thing is remember that both men and women are human beings, and they are all very different, and that we are going to find women who we both disagree with and whose style of politics we do not like. I have certainly, as has the women's movement, had to engage women who have been extremely hierarchical and who have not been helpful in terms of women's issues when they get into positions of power, and who, as Audrey Jeffers had once said, find that we need to hasten slowly. At the same time, I don't believe that women are the greatest impediment to women in power. There are often very few of them, and right now there are just 7 women in the cabinet, including the prime minister, and just 10 women in the House. So when you are a minority in a system that not only is, so the system itself is masculinist or historically male dominated, the way that the population understands the issues that exist in the society and their notions of masculinity and femininity and how they see those intersecting, those reproduce patriarchal gender norms. And on top of that, women are a minority in the highest tiers of our political leadership and are likely to actually be fighting many of the same struggles, not against each other, but often at the same time as each other. So I don't want to direct our attention to that age-old question of a subordinated group somehow being its own worst enemy, which is what's leveled at every subordinated group, whether Afro-Trinidadians, African-Americans, women, and so on. That's a discourse of the powerful. We need to be we really need to be questionable. It's a question. But I do think that one of the things to bring up Hazel Brown, and I must call her name in these circles, Hazel Brown was a strong advocate, for example, cross-party coalitions. And we do see work being led by women in the House to come together across party to form a cross-party caucus. This is, of course, a highly radical and extremely threatening activity because party loyalty is the ultimate kind of measure of whether you will survive in politics. And so we have seen efforts by women outside of politics engaging with those in the system and currently in the system now, in the parliamentary system, to actually create bases for women to support each other on legislation and so on that matters.
Where can we find your particular text on that particular issue that we just mentioned?
It's in the news. It's in the Newsday. It's in the Newsday column, and I really go through that discourse of, and I argue women are not their own worst enemy, and I walk through why. What is our worst enemy is the status quo, to which both women and men have been socialized, which is the patriarchal status quo. But keep in mind, just to end this question, keep in mind that women have always been taught to compete, because as women get higher and higher up in whatever it is, there are fewer and fewer of them that we see at the top. And so whether it's in relation to men or power or jobs or status or beauty or whatever it is, women are constantly placed in competition for the decreasing amount of status, power, and resources allowed to them. And that message is sent very young. And so we need to be careful of demonizing women for exemplifying the qualities that our society continues to reproduce, even as they are challenging it.
Dr. Hosein, as we look to wrap things up, let's go through some of the strategic and key appointments. Anyone stood out to you? I know you would have had a chance to look at all the different names next to their position. As you mentioned, a couple women, still very much in the minority when we look at the cabinet. But I'm watching some key installations here. I'm watching, well, of course, culture and community development, Michelle Benjamin.
Yes.
Keen one there.
I think some good decisions have been made. I'm speaking specifically with regard to women here.
Yeah.
We do have 7 women in the cabinet of 32. I want to be really critical in public about which I have again been before. I have written about when Stuart Young appointed his cabinet. I was very critical of the minority of women in it. I want to say that women have dominated in university degrees and university graduations at the University of the West Indies for 30 years. Of course, it's been a national obsession as a problem. And I want to talk about that glass ceiling that women hit once they leave the meritocracy of education and go into both the labor market and the political sphere, where they become an absolute minority. So 7 of 32 is something, I mean, as I like to tell my students, it's something we should be rioting about, frankly, because I think it is a violation of women's right to equality over decision-making in the country in which they are citizens, and I want to be very critical of that here. We are down to 10 women of 41 in the House, so just a quarter. So we have actually decreased our number of women in the House, and that is also because the parties ran so few women on their election slates. In the next local government elections that are coming up, I hope we can see better. Local government is not the tier of power that national elections are, but it is a start for us to challenge this gender inequality, and we should see it as extremely problematic and a denial of women's access to lead. I do want to signal one thing that I know is an absolute concern for the women's movement, which is that it is not clear what is going to happen to the gender division. And I think a clear statement needs to be made on this as soon as possible. And to keep in mind that there is not necessarily a link between gender and children or gender and family. At one point in time, Mrs. Prasad-Gosessa had gender in planning, which was an excellent and I think the best place for it to be. And of course, gender was once its own ministry combined with some others, gender, culture, and community.
Let me ask, Dr. Hosein, in the remaining time, I know this is kind of off what transpired in the politics, but I wanted to always ask you, what damage was done to at least the perception of women in the role of national security and I guess the TTPS, when we look at what happened there with the first ever woman commissioner, who of course we know it's before court, so we won't get into the details of the suspension and all that, but was there some damage in that regard as it pertains to women in the role of national security?
These are great questions, JW. One of the things is that when women don't do well at something, we don't see them as individuals. We then say, well, women can't do that job. So if a woman leader in any form, for whatever reason, doesn't do the job, we think we've given women a chance and we need to go back to men. Men, of course, do a terrible job at things all the time because they're people. And we don't say, well, this is because they are men. Oh, well, we've given men a chance and they have wrecked the climate. And so now we need to get rid of all the men and put women in charge. We don't have those kinds of conversations. So I think that you've asked a real question, and I think there were real implications. I mean, the police service works very differently in terms of hiring and appointments. But I do think that, every time women don't do well, the discourse is reproduced, well, maybe women shouldn't have been there in the first place. But before we finish, I do want to get back to the question of gender. I do want to say that the women's movement is going to be asking and should be asking where is this going to be? What is its priority? And to keep in mind that gender includes gender responsive budgeting, that we want it, that also we don't put with gender, for example, just with social development. Gender is not about welfare and seeing women as a welfare category. Women are contributors to the economy in highly gendered ways because the economy itself is gendered. So the highest paid sectors of the economy, energy and construction, are 80% male dominated for a range of reasons. Women tend to dominate in the informal sector as well as in lower paid sectors of the economy, even though they are in some higher tiers as well. So when we look at economic planning and budgeting, we have to look at it at a gendered lens. I just want to break up that association between gender and children. Gender is not about children. It is about what's happening in the politics and the economics, as well as, of course, in terms of planning, as well as, of course, in terms of family. And we want to see a clear statement about its priority in this government.
Dr. Hosein, as always, it's
been a pleasure.
Pleasure and a treasure touching base with you. Sure we get a chance to do this again soon. All the best, and thanks for your perspective.
Thank you for having me, and have a good day to your viewers.
Same to you, Dr. Gabrielle Hosein there from the University of the West Indies, always on the ball, very much passionate about gender issues. We're going to come back and really do that breakdown of the cabinet, the appointments. Let's find out what's happening via the new cabinet with Professor Hamid Ghani, political scientist. He joins me next.